It's good to be with you guys here at Friendly Ford. Y'all are longtime BG users and we really appreciate it. And we'd ask your service manager if we could just spend a little bit of time with you guys as an advisor so we can kind of hone our skills, in dealing with the customer, overcoming objections and things like that. Kind of turning our thoughts to brake service. And let me begin by sort of a stupid rhetorical question here, an SRQ. Of all the systems on a Ford that make it go, would you guys agree with me if I said nothing's more important than the system that makes it stop? What do you think, Chris? Yep. Makes sense? So you guys have done well with the brake fluid service. Y'all have had it in place for a while. Last year, you did 575 brake fluid services, to which we say thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Here's the concern, though. You had over 10,000 customer pay ROs come through here last year. And so literally 5% got a brake fluid service. Now, Bob, another stupid question, but humor me. What percent of those 10,600 customers had brakes? What percent of them? 100%. 100% have brakes. 5% of them got a brake fluid service. Chris, you see where I'm headed with this. The bad news is, honestly, we're really not doing good at brake fluid services. Now, let me tell you the good news. We're not doing good at brake fluid services. And here's what I mean by that. There's a lot of meat on the bone, which means when you guys go back to work this afternoon, 95% of the customers that you see, Chris, are going to need what? A brake service, absolutely. So let me set something up here. This is out of an F-150, got it back in your shop. It was a 29 F-150, got about 60,000 miles on it. So I'm going to take this brake fluid and just simply put it over here into one of these test tubes. And we're just going to simply heat this brake fluid up and kind of see what happens. And then I want to show you guys a little brief video. But I'm going to put the brake fluid in here. Let me get that. Did a little dribble on the side there. Don't want to have a fire. We've never had a fire at BG. We have had a couple of thermal events though, but we don't want that to happen. This is the BG brake fluid that you guys are very familiar with. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. We'll put the DOT4 brake fluid over here. Now, right off the bat, you can see there's just a little bit of a color change between the two, can't you? Because over mileage and time, that brake fluid absorbs a little bit of moisture. It's got some air in the system. So we've got those about equal there. I'm going to turn this on, and this is going to take about, 3 or 4 minutes for this to do its thing. Chris, if you just kind of keep an eye on that as we go and holler at me when one of those starts to boil. With that said, let's look at brake fluid systems. I want you guys to watch this brief video and let's look at what the issue is.
Brake system challenges. According to federal guidelines, brake fluid must maintain a high boiling point in order to function properly. But even with as little as 4% water contamination, the fluid's boiling point can dip below the federally regulated DOT3 standard. How does water get into the system? Well, when you apply the brakes, brake fluid gets hotter. And when the brake fluid cools again, condensation occurs. Because brake fluid is hygroscopic, meaning that it attracts moisture, the brake fluid absorbs that condensation. Water has a lower boiling point than brake fluid. So as the brakes build heat while stopping, that water-contaminated fluid can begin to boil, forming air pockets. Brake fluid is not compressible, but air is. The result is a loss of hydraulic pressure, leading to a spongy brake pedal and decreased stopping power. This moisture also accelerates the corrosion of vital system components, such as the master cylinder, the anti-lock brake assembly, and the calipers. Any kind of system failure in the brakes is not just expensive to repair, it's also dangerous while driving. The ability to stop your car predictably and quickly is vital to your safety.
So let's just kind of recap what it said in the video, because we want to look at some technical challenges, but then because you guys are advisors, you got to put this in language that Mr. Smith, the teacher, or Mrs. Jones, the CPA, can understand. So the technical side of it is water gets into the system, air pockets are also in the system, and that can lead to corrosion. You know, when you have a piece of steel and you expose it to the elements, you know, or when moisture gets on it, air gets to it, different things like that. When that begins to happen, it's not long before you get rust and corrosion. Certainly that's not something you want in the brake system. But we've kind of got to get real with this because the customer has no concept of that. Air, moisture, corrosion, all of those things are sort of off their radar. Here are the things that they focus on. By the way, you can tell we're beginning to get pretty hot here, and we're getting a little bit of movement in this one over here on your left. But here's what the customer's concerned with. A spongy brake pedal. They're concerned with decreased stopping power. They are concerned with several other issues. Now, before I get to the solution here, because I want us to look at the solution, but I want to come back and focus on what they were talking about in the video. Maybe the best way to explain it, that's just about done its thing. Maybe the best way to explain it is this. If this is a brake fluid line, if this is a brake fluid line right here, and we have brake fluid over here, and we have brake fluid over here, and we have water here, at 212 degrees above zero, what happens to the water? It boils. In other words, it turns to a gas. So now we have air over here, or a gas over here, versus this brake line that's totally full of brake fluid. How am I doing here? Yeah, look what's going on. I'm going to shut the heat off on this. The first thing that happens is when we get to 212 degrees, the first thing that happens is the water begins to boil. Does that make sense? But eventually, we're going to boil all the water out of there, and then what starts to boil? After the water boils, the brake fluid itself starts to boil. So step one is we boil out the water. Step two is the brake fluid itself starts to boil. By the way, isn't that remarkable? Just by heating up brake fluid, you see the contamination in there, you know, by way of how moisture builds up in the system. So think of it this way, Bob. You remember from junior high physics class, junior high science, and they said this in the video, you can't compress a liquid, which means when you put 10 psi in here, when you put 10 psi of pressure into that brake line, you get 10 psi over here, right? Because of when you push here, you can't compress the liquid, it goes over there. Now, when you have a gas, however, you put 10 psi over here, and I don't know exactly what comes out over here, but here's what I do know. It ain't 10 psi. Does that make sense? When you apply the brake pedal, it compresses the gas, and that's where you get that feeling of whoa, 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 ho, 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 ho. You felt that before? Like if you're pulling a trailer or pulling a boat or, you know, an ATV or something like that, and it's like suddenly, man, this thing is not responding, you know, which we refer to as brake fade or brake lag in the system. So what you guys saw here pretty graphically was the difference between a good .4 ultra dry brake fluid, which is the BG that y'all are using, versus factory fill, which was a .3. Now, before I go any further, let's take a quick look at the solution here for just a minute.
The solution, the BG brake service. To maintain efficient stopping power and prevent unnecessary corrosion or component damage, contaminated fluid must be removed and new, high-quality fluid must be introduced. BG offers specialized equipment that makes the fluid exchange simple and effective, and we offer high-quality brake fluids that exceed both federal and SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, standards.
So again, let's put this in perspective. We talked about what the customer's issues were. Spongy brakes, brake lag, and then ultimately some type of brake fluid corrosion, which messes up an ABS module. And I know, Chris, you've been in a shop before other than just an advisor. ABS module, $2,000 is not out of the question. Master cylinder, parts and labor can get on up there. So expensive components, not to mention the safety side of the equation. So what are the benefits of the service? Better component life. In other words, with the BG Lifetime Protection Plan, we're going to stand behind that brake fluid system, master cylinder, the calipers, all of that. We're going to stand behind that for life because we believe that replacing that fluid every 30,000 miles is going to fight off that corrosion. We're going to have maintained or restored stopping power because, again, if we have this situation here with air in the system, we do the service, we get all that air and moisture out of the system. It's not rocket science to realize that issue goes away. Avoided corrosion, and then you don't want to ever forget we have the Lifetime Protection Plan. I guess my question to you guys is this. When you look at a DOT 3 with 60,000 miles on it and all the air and moisture that's built up compared to a good DOT 4, if the BG brake fluid will do what you guys have seen it do, Bob, I think you can see why that's a must when you do a brake fluid service, isn't it? So that's why when you guys are offering this service to the customer, you're not just offering any garden variety fluid replacement. You're getting out all of the air, you're getting out all of the moisture, you're doing all of those things in addition with going back in with a fluid that was higher quality than what came from the factory. Really, this is a pretty good example. This is from an F250. When you just simply look at the old brake fluid, I got this at one of our dealerships, that is just hose material and junk and probably a little old dirt, Oklahoma dirt in that brake fluid system. That's what the new looks like after the service. Now, stupid question, Bob. Which one of those would you rather have in your own brake fluid system? And your wife deserves the same, right? That's why we sell that service. All right, so let's unpack this and let me give you a little bit of method to why I did what I did. First of all, I want to get fluid from one of their vehicles that they have in the shop, and I just put it in one of the BG squirt bottles. So I'm going to get one of their actual vehicles' brake fluid systems, because I also drive the point home, this is brake fluid that came out of your shop. I would suggest you not get this out of the brake fluid machine because that's going to be it's going to be a mixture of old and some brand new DOT 4 fluid. It's going to make for a better demo if you'll just pull it right out of one of their vehicles. It's even better if you get it out of the service advisor or the service manager's vehicle. Really, nothing fancy about this. I just simply want the brake fluid at about the level of the top of my stand. Now, these, you're going to have access to being able to order these cones online. They're not expensive. You can get a pretty good setup altogether for about $100 that has the receivers down here, the what's called the Edison base, and the cones that screw into it. Just get the 600-watt cones. And I want to leave about 2.5 inches to 3 inches at the top. You notice how no matter how much that boiled, it didn't boil over. If you fill this up too full, it will boil over, and just simply to avoid that, give yourself about 2 to 3 inches headroom, and it won't be an issue. This will never let you down. Spent brake fluid will always boil. The DOT 4 won't. When the product over here begins to boil, that's when you take the BG off, then you take the other one off. I did go ahead and shut off the power as well, but I just set those aside into my stand and make the point.